From the Squamish Chief.
This is the Squamish Sound. I'm Keili Bartlett.
And I'm Stephen Chua. This is the 29th episode of our weekly podcast.
You'll hear the story behind the story as we take you into the newsroom. We'll talk about what did and didn't get into the newspaper this week.
On the show today, we're covering a verbal fight to the death.
What?
Well, not quite. But federal election candidates for the Sea to Sky did their best to impress voters at the all-candidates debate on Wednesday. And, bringing books to Nicaragua, a former Squamish resident has made it her mission to spread literacy. So first off, we just came fresh out from the all-candidates debate here in Squamish, where, can you say the full riding again?
The West Vancouver Sunshine Coast Sea to Sky Country riding candidates.
Yes, where that big long name, people running for that vast swath of land that is our riding, all showed up, every single one of them.
All seven.
All seven. And they were there to strut their stuff, to show us and try to woo us and impress. And, I mean, there were a lot of highlights. These things have a danger of being quite dry and quite boring. And I've been to a few where they have been, but this one, thankfully, actually turned out to be quite interesting.
It was quite animated, I would say.
Absolutely. I don't know, just general feel of it. What was your take?
General feel, I think, it kept people's attention, which is really good. There's a tendency in these kind of meetings to zone out, especially when people get into some kind of political jargon. It's easy to just let it fly over your head. Whereas a lot of this, they kept our attention pretty well. There were some interesting reactions and that kind of thing. There were some interesting outfits as well. and
yeah, what Keili's referring to is there were some candidates from, I guess, not quite so established parties. One in particular, with respect to that outfit, was wearing a banana suit.
Yes. Saying
that politics was driving him bananas. This would be Gordon Jeffrey of the Rhinoceros Party, which is intended, at least originally, to be a bit of a parody party. But while his message is fully laced with lots of humor, there is a little bit of an edge to it. And you can hear from what we're about to play you that he doesn't hold back, and he does have some pointed commentary about how the current state of politics is.
Simply put, my party won't. Our main promise is to break all our promises, just like the other major parties. We're just a little more upfront about it. In fact, I've already broken my first promise, which was to break all my promises by keeping my second promise, which was to not bother any constituents in their homes while I was going around to collect my signatures to get on the ballot. So my party doesn't have, it was pretty apolitical. We don't have many promises that you should take seriously at all. I try not to make promises when I'm speaking seriously because I don't know exactly how much power I would have were I to be somehow elected. So I'll talk about what I would like to do and what I think we should do, but I will try to avoid making promises that I know or I'm not sure I will be able to keep, because integrity and honesty are very important to me, as I think they ought to be, I know I live in a fantasy land, to all politicians. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was in response to the question that the Squamish Chief asked, which was the question that kicked off the night. And we asked, with all the promises that we've heard throughout the campaign, how can voters know that these promises will be kept after the election? So a little bit voter trust, trying to develop that, and how people can ensure that they're voting for who they think they're voting for.
Yeah, so he had some, I think he's echoing a sentiment that a lot of people do feel at this point. Because, I mean, it's very easy to get pretty jaded with politics a lot of the times.
Yes.
And I think he did a very good job of encapsulating that emotion. The next person that we're going to be hearing from is Terry Grimwood. He is an independent candidate, but sort of, kind of, not really, because he says he's founded a party called the Canada Fresh Party. The only thing is that it's not been officially recognized, so he's still technically an independent. He had a lot of reaction drawn from the crowd. He had some ideas that were unusual, Maybe you could say we're a bit quirky. We'll let you listen and you can, I guess, decide for yourself.
So this was his answer for reference to the same question that you just heard Gordon answer.
I talked about pension funds, and Canada has almost $1 trillion in pension funds. And we're getting the benefit of only 10% of that. And when it comes, there's absolutely no reason why Canada can't balance a budget. The money we are the second largest landmass in the country. And I've been across Canada 3 times in the last year. And it's beautiful. You just have to realize that we need to have a transit hub every 50 kilometers right across the country in all directions so that people can travel that don't own a Cadillac.
Yeah, and as you can hear, it's...
He didn't really answer it.
Yeah, it wasn't quite an answer, but he was very quick to jump onto one of his... the key planks of his platform, which was very much related to pension finances and stuff like that. Onto, I guess, we're going to be hearing a little bit more from 2 more established party candidates, the Liberals and the Conservatives. And overall, my impression was that while the candidates from other parties were a lot more better at playing to the emotions and with rhetoric and getting like a real audible, visceral reaction out of a crowd. These guys, the more established parties, were a lot better at giving more specific promises, especially with Patrick Weiler. He's the Liberal candidate. You can hear him just rattle off, okay, we're going to give you X amount of dollars at this time with this policy. Like, it was a very specific set in stone plan. And you can see, I guess, the differences in, I guess, parties that would be considered underdogs and parties that are more well established and have had time to just work on their policy and just kind of really get down to the details.
Putting their ideas into practice.
Exactly. Now, whether or not that's going to be favorable to voters is yet to be seen, but it is definitely a difference in style that I think you can hear here. We're going to first listen to Patrick Weiler. He's the Liberal candidate, and then we'll shift over to Gabrielle Loren, who is the Conservative candidate.
I think there's really a number of issues facing business in Squamish, and I think there's really a risk right now that Squamish could become just a bedroom community. So many people that I know that live in Squamish don't work here. They're commuting from here to Vancouver, or they're commuting from here to Whistler. And one of the main reasons why is you don't have necessarily the same anchors for business here to really have all those jobs for people that want to live here to work here. There are some great examples of some really fantastic companies here. I think we need a lot more of them. My job as MP would be to work as best as I can with the communities to support that. One of the areas the Liberal Party really sees as a major growth area is focusing on the clean energy economy of the future. There's a fantastic company here in carbon engineering that the government's provided some support towards. And going forward, what we're going to do is we're promising to cut corporate taxes in half for all companies that are involved in producing net zero technologies and renewable energy.
Being my own small business owner for the last 30 years, I feel your pain. Number one is finding and retaining staff. That's what I've heard when I've walked through the streets of Squamish talking to business owners. They say we can get them, but they don't stay very long because they don't have places to stay. They don't have any of the housing that they can afford based on what I can afford to pay them. And that's a real crisis. Businesses are bogged down with red tape, stupid things. It's not funny. Businesses need help, so we've got a number of policies that we're looking at implementing, including reducing the tax on allowing the splitting of income, also reducing regulatory burdens so that we can all get ahead.
So they were answering a question about what challenges Squamish businesses face in particular, and that was asked by the Squamish Chamber of Commerce.
And credit to them, it shows that they've at least talked to some people in the riding, because those 2 points that they identified, have been kind of rallying cries for a lot of people for quite some time in Squamish. And not everyone, as we were able to later tell, was cued into that. So fair credit to them. They did a little bit of homework at least. The next point of interest that we want to, I guess, show you guys is the candidate from the People's Party of Canada. His name is Robert, also known as Doug Bebb. And the People's Party has come under a lot of attention because they advocate for policies that some people might consider a bit divisive, a little bit harsh towards minorities.
Yeah, and especially their immigration policies.
Yes. So they've come out with rhetoric that has been saying, we want to cut down on immigration, we want to cut down on multiculturalism. And here we're going to play you a clip where that is a little bit more fully fleshed out.
And Doug, the question is, why do you want to get rid of the Multiculturalism Act?
The Multiculturalism Act favors a view of society that's fragmented, where people live in certain areas and they don't interact. And this is actually encouraged. We do actually appreciate other contributors to our culture in Canada. We feel they should be integrated rather than living alone. And so the federal monies that are spent on multiculturalism actually encourage that sort of divisive segregation in society. And we think we should get rid of that because our view of Canadians is that we're all going to be the same. We're going to be treated the same, equal rights for all, special rights for none, special rights for no, interest groups like SNC-Lavalin, and I could go on about how this kind of corruption has crept into the political system.
You can see, I guess, a little bit more of a feel of where he's coming from with that.
And so it's a little bit more of a well-presented, perhaps, answer about one of their policy lines, which is special treatment for none. And that was something that he actually repeated multiple times throughout the evening.
Yes. And there's one interesting case when Tourism Squamish asked, what were you going to do for tourism in Squamish? And that was basically his answer, special treatment for none, including... Yeah. So he said nothing. Essentially.
Yeah, well, straightforward, I suppose.
Yep, he was probably the most concise out of the candidates. He, at times, just kept his answers to maybe a sentence or two.
So talking about the Tourism Squamish question, let's also see what Dana Taylor of the Green Party had to say about that, because he had quite an answer.
The sound is back to life again, and all of that supports is directed to supporting the tourism industry as it will happen along the sea to sky country. However, none of that is going to improve if our rivers dry up, our glaciers melt, the fish can't get up the stream, and forests are burning from the flash for the fires that take place. Climate change will impact and what's happening in this emergency tourism far more so than a grant from the Canadian government. And while I wholeheartedly support and recognize the attributes and what can happen in terms of supporting that kind of programming, we have to deal with the big issues first, and there's no shortcut to doing so.
As you can hear, that's something that I guess plays to probably what I would argue the Greens have as the biggest ace up their sleeve, which is the claim to be the party that cares about, that one big, you could argue maybe apocalyptic thing that is going to affect all of us sooner or later.
Not all the candidates would argue that.
Exactly.
As we saw last night.
As we certainly did.
So there's one more candidate that we haven't heard from on this episode yet, and that would be Judith Wilson of the NDP. She had some strong words. So she, unfortunately, was only there for about half of the evening. She had to leave. She said she was catching a ferry back to the Sunshine Coast. And so she was there for almost all of the panel questions, but none of the public questions that the audience was able to ask. And so she made her closing statement early and departed. But
Right.
while she was there, she did have some strong choice of words for her opposing candidates.
Vote for people who blatantly hold up in front of you a promise to transform the political system, to turn it into one where every vote counts, and instead stick with the old first past the post. That was supposed to be the last election, and your party betrayed everyone who made that choice. There were many other reasons. So don't vote Liberal if that's what you're trying to achieve this time. If you're still trying to achieve stopping the Conservatives from visiting upon us Harper 2.0, then you've got a couple of other choices to make. And those choices are either the Green Party or the NDP.
She spared no words. She went right for it. And I'm not sure if that had something to do, I think we were talking about this, where maybe it was because she knew she was under a time pressure, that she knew she had to make a little bit of...
impact, yeah.
Yeah, make some impact. But out of all the candidates, I would say she was probably the most direct in coming at the Liberals. I mean, all of them took pot shots here and there. Some indirectly, some a little bit more directly, but she went right in there. I think that would probably be her strongest performance of the evening. With respect to actual policy and other things like that, it was more of an emotional play. Like, I'm the person from this party that has a history of doing this. But she wasn't very specific at what she was doing. I think her game was more of an offensive tact.
And so throughout the course of the evening, for the panel questions, the candidates had 2 minutes to answer these questions. And then for the public questions, they gave them a minute. So they did have quite a time squeeze. And hopefully, if you're paying attention, you can read more about their policies and exactly what they're preaching through local coverage.
Absolutely. Keili is going to be heading our federal coverage. So stay tuned. Watch her Twitter. Watch our Twitter too. Watch our site. Everything, because we are going to have more stories coming in about the candidates. And we'll also be on top of everything on election night. We'll all be here, all hands on deck. So stay tuned. And you'll be hearing a lot more from us very soon.
Don't forget to vote.
Okay, we're bringing it over to our editor's moment or pick or choice.
I came to you.
Whatever you
Not
want to
bringing
call
anything to me.
And we're here with our esteemed editress, Jennifer Thuncher.
That's not a word.
Yes, we're giving you a fancier title now.
This is serious, Dean.
Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. So, what is the thing?
Okay, you guys did the most important discussion, which was about the all candidates, but I will do my best. So a local woman, Carol Ann Ray, she was a teacher here for many years back in the 90s. Since she retired, she's gone down to Nicaragua, and so I talked to her this week for a story, and I thought what she had to say sort of ties in politically with what you and Keili have been talking about. So we'll have a listen to her, but first just a little bit of Nicaragua history. Okay. Or insight. It's the third least densely populated nation in Central America. It is between Mexico and Colombia, bordered by Honduras and to the north and Costa Rica to the south. Sort of situate yourselves there. So she went from Squamish to Nicaragua. And politically, as many of our listeners will know, President Daniel Ortega is in power. He's been in power since 2007. He used to be the leader from 79 to 90. So there was a bit of an uprising that brought him to power. So that's where we are right now. So we're going to have a listen to Carol Ann Ray, and then I'll tell you what she's doing down there. But I asked her how the whole Trump anti-immigration system is playing down in Nicaragua, and this is what she had to say.
You don't hear too much about it on the local news because right now there is such turmoil going on within the country. The President Ortega, and he's actually acting as a dictator, and he's closing up all the media and harassing, and so that's much more of an important issue, you know. I haven't heard of any Nicaraguans being, in problems with the Trump and with the U.S. There probably has been, but it hasn't been,
more acute things to think about every day.
Yeah, right. The economy is way down. The tourism is almost non-extinct right now. All those things were building up beautifully, and
hopefully
it totally messed it. So. And I was a big supporter of Ortega and the Sandinistas, and because I had lived there during the Somoza time when he was the dictator, and I saw what he did. Very not much. I didn't see a lot, but
right.
I got a feel for it, and it just seems so sad that the people that fought against Ortega, Somoza, are now doing the same sorts of things that he did. Power corrupts, and it's sad, and it's sad for the people because I don't know.
And who do they who do they trust if this is what?
Well,
they thought was better?
I mean, I read just the other day somebody said, well, Ortega gave me a new roof for my house. Tin, he gave me them corrugated tin. Yes, I'll vote for him.
Right.
So they buy the votes in that way, so they don't see the value of going out and putting an X on a ballot, because that just then disappears, doesn't it? It doesn't seem like I've done anything. And but if I get a new roof or rice.
So interesting, and puts it in perspective, right?
Yeah.
So what she's doing down there is her and some other expats started lending libraries. So what she explained to us, and you can find this on the website with our podcast, it goes into more detail in a story that we put up about where the libraries are and that kind of thing within Nicaragua. But the way they set it up was there's little lending libraries and they go to people out in the country, or now there's one in downtown Granada. And so they're asking Squamish people to help with donations to get books, which are quite rare and quite expensive. So head on over there and to our site and check out that story and hopefully support what she's doing. It's a great cause.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating because as you mentioned in your story, something as basic that we take it for granted here as a library, it's really something that requires I would argue like a Herculean effort to really get off the ground in a place like that.
Yeah, she talks about how for us, many of us would walk to the library, take a bus to the library, go to the library. There, for the people who live there, before these lending libraries started, they would go to the library and there'd be a man, almost always a man, behind a counter who would say, why do you want the book? What do you need the book for? Then, say a child for school would get the book and have to stay there and read it. So these lending libraries, they had books donated, and now they take them to the park, or they have children that can come in, and it sort of spreads literacy and knowledge around.
All right, a really important story. Thanks, Jen.
Bye.
The Squamish Sound is brought to you by the Squamish Chief. The music for this episode was produced by Stephen Chua, cover photo by Clayton Matthews. Have a story tip? Give us a call at 604-892-9161. Send an email to news@squamishchief.com. You can read these stories and more online at squamishchief.com, the newspaper, and have the news delivered to your door every week.